This is an advertisement by BetterHelp. January arrives with a sense of expectation and change. But real change is rarely loud or dramatic.
It's noticing what no longer needs to be there. Thoughts you keep turning over even when they're not helping.
And when you live with those long enough, they can start to feel normal until you pause and see them more clearly. That's where perspective helps. Not fixing yourself, just creating space to understand what's been weighing you down.
Therapy can offer that space, a clearer view of your own patterns and what's worth holding on to. BetterHelp makes starting straightforward. You answer a few questions and they match you with a qualified therapist. If it doesn't feel right, you can switch at any time.
Whether you're into New Year's resolutions or not, working to better yourself is something everyone should do. And you don't even need to bulldoze your life to do it. Simply use BetterHelp.
BetterHelp makes it easy to get matched online with a qualified therapist. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/restishistory. That's betterhelp.com/restishistory.
This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Car shopping shouldn't feel like preparing for a marathon of paperwork. That's why Carvana makes buying and financing your car easy. From start to finish, search thousands of vehicles with great prices. All online, all on your time. And when you're ready, your new car shows up right at your door. It doesn't get better than that. Buy your car the easy way. On Carvana. Delivery fees may apply.
All she saw was a merciless sea of black crosses, bearing little strips of stamped tin at all angles across their faces. She could distinguish no order or arrangement in their mass, nothing but a waist-high wilderness as of weeds stricken dead rushing at her. She went forward, moved to the left and the right hopelessly, wondering by what guidance she should ever come to her own. A great distance away there was a line of whiteness. It proved to be a block of some 200 or 300 graves, whose headstones had already been set, whose flowers were planted out, and whose new-sown grass showed green. Here she could see clear-cut letters at the ends of the rows, and, referring to her slip, realised that it was not here she must look. That is towards the end of a short story called The Gardener by Rudyard Kipling, and it describes a woman called Helen Terrell, a spinster who has brought up her nephew, who then enlists in the First World War, dies, and that describes her going to one of the war cemeteries that is in the process of being built. And Dominic, I know that you're an admirer of that short story because it packs an incredible punch at the end, doesn't it? For reasons that I'm not going to explain. People, if you haven't read it, it's available online. It's quite short. I think it's one of the great short stories ever written.
I couldn't agree more, Tom. It's funny because you said to me you were going to go in on The Gardener, Kipling's short story from 1925, to start the podcast. And I had been thinking, would I mention The Gardener in the podcast? And I thought, I won't go into it in case Tom hasn't read it. And then I'll have to do all the carrying with it. And I might start crying. And that would be really...
Do you know, Dom, I read it every 11th.
Do you?
I do. I do. I'm not, I don't think I've ever worn a poppy. I'm not generally a great one for that kind of stuff.
Right.
But I do read The Gardener because I always want to read it and find out, will I manage to read it without welling up at the end? And as yet, no.
Yeah, for people who think that Kipling is all the Jungle Book and sort of imperial jingoism, if you read this one short story, and it won't even take you an hour, it will utterly dispel everything you thought about Kipling. Because Kipling, of course, had lost his son, Tom, hadn't he? John, loose in 1915, and Kipling had pulled strings to get him into the army and then lost his son, and the grief stayed with him. For the rest of his, and the guilt, I suppose, to some extent, for the rest of his life.
And I think that what we're talking about, obviously, Remembrance Day, the armistice, all that kind of stuff, because today, the day that this episode is going out, is the 11th of November. And one of the challenges, obviously, for people was to deal with the scale of the loss and the scale of the grief. And I think often, in terms of literature, it's a struggle for people. But I think the Kipling story is, I think it's the greatest work of literature specifically on this topic.
I think there are two great works of literature, Tom, aren't there? There's Kipling's short story and there's a new book. I think Isn't there a book about this subject?
Sorry. Yes, Dominic. Oh, God, here I am dwelling on Kipling, who's been long dead. But of course, the top historian has written...
Enough of the dead.
Yes. Let's cut to the living. Dominic, I gather you have a new book out on the First World War.
I do indeed. It's one of my Adventures in Time series about the First World War, and I promise we won't talk about it too much.
Is it very moving?
I think I found it quite moving to write it, actually. I found it genuinely moving. And the First World War is, like all wars, it's a mosaic of incredibly sort of stirring and emotive individual stories. And writing it for children, I was particularly conscious of that because, of course, the First World War is presented to children as this sort of abyss of suffering. But enough of that. So you can obviously buy it for your children, and you should, for Christmas. But we want to talk more broadly, don't we, about the end of the war and how it was remembered. So why don't we, before we get into the remembrance itself, just start? Why don't we start sort of on the last day? So...
Yes, a kind of sequel to the Gary Sheffield episode we did about the Western Front.
So the Germans they've launched their great gamble, haven't they? And they've been pushed back. And everything's falling apart in Germany. The German Revolution has started. And they've already sent envoys to the Compiègne forest to talk to the Allies. And so it's Monday, the 11th of November. We could start at 5:19 in the morning, which is when the envoys, they've heard reports.
So these are MPs, right?
German they're politicians. There's, I think, a couple of sort of military guys. They have been sort of sent. They have the regime is collapsing behind them.
So the Kaiser has fled.
The Kaiser fled on Saturday night, Sunday morning
to the Netherlands.
So it's now Monday. They've discovered. They see from the French Royal-Women's newspapers that the Kaiser has abdicated and Germany is in revolution. They've been given a few days to consider the Allies' terms. And they basically decide they have no choice but to accept them. So they gather in Marshal Foch's carriage in this forest clearing, very bleary-eyed, just round about dawn, before dawn, I think. And they end up signing the terms that basically say hostilities will cease at 11th of November, i.e. on Monday, at 11 o'clock. They have to give a time, obviously, a random time.
And so they choose it for the symmetry of it.
Yeah, well, also because that will give to everybody, that will give time for the news to spread across the front. I mean, you don't.
But 11. I mean, that's.
Yeah, of course. It's not the 11th minute of the 11th hour. It's just at 11 o'clock.
11 o'clock?
Yeah.
Of the 11th day.
Yeah, I suppose of the 11th.
Yeah.
So the weird thing is that the fighting obviously goes on to 11.
Because the French and the Americans in particular don't trust the Germans, right?
But, well, also there's an inbuilt ratchet, isn't there? I mean, if you're frightened, if you think there's a possibility that the enemy will carry on fighting, then you'll carry on fighting. So it depends slightly where you are on the front. But basically, in those few hours, more than 2,000 men are killed. I mean, it's extraordinary to think of. Imagine dying, at 10 o'clock, and people do die at kind of 10:45 and so on.
So the last British combatant is George Ellison from Leeds. I looked up on Wikipedia.
Did you? There's absolute top quality research going on here.
But the thing that's interesting about him, is that he had fought at Mons in 1914.
Yeah.
So he'd done the retreat from Mons.
Right at the beginning.
He'd fought on the Western Front. He'd survived it, and then he got killed outside Mons. So he'd returned to Mons on the push an hour and a half.
That's gutting,
before the armistice.
I mean, there's some really heartbreaking stories. So there's a French guy, Augustin Trébuchon, and he's a messenger. He's from the sort of southwest of France, down by the Languedoc or something. And at 10:45, he's given a note by his kind of commanding officer. He says, go and give this note to the troops and tell them, only 15 minutes to go. As soon as the clock ticks, there's going to be food for them at the back. We'll have a big meal. Trebuchet goes off and he's killed. And the note is in his hand, shot or something. There's a guy from Canada, there's a man called George Price. He's searching houses by a Belgian canal and he's shot by a German sniper.
Oh, that's harsh.
And with just minutes to go, nurses come and run to his aid and he dies 2 minutes before the ceasefire.
And then the very last.
Is this Henry Gunter?
Yes.
He's only got himself to blame. It's a terrible story. So Henry Gunter is from Baltimore. He had been a sergeant, but he's been demoted for bad behavior I can't remember exactly what the bad behavior was. He's been demoted and he's desperate to get promoted before the ceasefire, to get his stripes back, basically. So he decides to charge a German machine gun post, and the clock is literally ticking down the seconds. And everybody shouts, stop.
Stop, you're mad.
Yeah. His own side say stop. The Germans wave him away and say, stop, stop coming. There's only seconds left. What are you doing? And he just keeps coming because he thinks he'll be promoted, and they shoot him.
And apparently he lands in the mud as the clocks are sounding, as the bells are sounding.
Well, the other story about as the bells are sounding is the Wilfred Owen story, which I think is probably a little bit apocryphal. So Wilfred Owen has been killed just before, so a few days earlier. But the story goes that it's as the bells are ringing, I think Shrewsbury.
Cheers, everyone's cheering.
Yeah, and the postman turns up opens the gate and comes and knocks on the door and gives his parents the telegram. I think that story has too much symmetry to be true, but it does give you a sense of the sort of, that even amid the celebration, there is this sense of terrible tragedy.
Right. And so in the wake of the ceasefire, the armistice, the end of the war, there then comes the question of how do you mark it? How do you commemorate it? How do you
even on the day,
it?
People think,
but so, even before it, we'll come to that. But it kind of, now to us, it seems obvious that you would remember it, that you would commemorate it, that it would be something that you'd kind of swathe in ritual, I suppose.
Yeah.
But actually, it's not obvious, because if you look at the previous great conflict, the Napoleonic Wars, Battle of Waterloo or whatever, it's not commemorated in that way at all.
No.
And in fact, people are going over, and Yorkshire kind of fertilizer manufacturers are going over and shoveling up the bones, which is why there are no bones to be found at Waterloo. I think they found a soldier in 2012 or something when they were digging a car park ready for the.
They're on fields in Yorkshire. Is that what you're saying?
They all got clean. So basically, so there was Germans would complain that British fertilizer companies were kind of going across all the battlefields of Europe, scooping up all the bones and grinding them up and taking them back and selling them to farmers in Yorkshire.
That's a nation of shopkeepers for you, there, isn't it? I mean, one man's battle is another's commercial fertilizing opportunity. And
the teeth.
Yeah.
So even into the American
teeth.
Civil War,
yes.
People are harvesting teeth, and within, Byron goes when he he leaves England and goes on his grand tour across Europe. He stops off at Waterloo. He's a tourist, and he's one of a large number of tourists who are visiting it.
Yeah.
And that there is this, it seems to us, incredibly hard-nosed attitude towards casualties. But I'm guessing that the reason why there's such a difference is that armies in the First World War are conscripted armies. And so there's a sense that they're citizen armies. And so it's the nation in arms. So that's kind of radically different, isn't it?
That is different. I think there had been a change before that. I think the Victorian cult of death is obviously part of it. The Victorian obsession with memorialization and the rituals of mourning and so on, which does mark them out as different from their predecessors. I think there had been memorials to the dead of the Crimea. And then particularly the big precedent is the Boer War. So there are still a lot of Boer War memorials, in sort of market towns and things across England. So again, there's a sense at that point, I think, that war is becoming the casualties in war are becoming shocking and something worth noting, but also that they're becoming individual, so that you want the names recorded. I mean, that's definitely the case with the First World War, that people did not want. The instinct was, well, we'll just have what we had in previous wars, which is mass graves. So the officers will be different, but the men will just be in mass graves. And there's a general feeling, I think, that is intolerable, that so many people, have joined up. Some have been conscripted, some have been volunteers before that, but they're ordinary blokes. They're not professional soldiers, and they deserve better.
And that all are equal in death.
Well, that's a really interesting thing, isn't it? And do you know all about this, about the War Graves Commission and all this? Because this is a fascinating story.
Well, I know that plans for it get set up before the end of the war, so 1917, I think.
Yeah, I mean,
it's
going
Fabian
back,
Ware, isn't it?
So Fabian Ware is a director of the Rio Tinto Zinc Company. So if you're a conspiracy theorist in the 60s,
yes.
You believed that they were the kind of part of the Illuminati or something. Anyway, he's too old to fight in the war, but he goes, and I think he's involved with the Red Cross. And immediately, I think in 1914, he says, well, what are we going to, it's killing so many people. What are we going to do? And he puts a lot of, he talks to sort of bigwigs back home, puts a lot of pressure on the government, and they set up a Graves Registration Commission, and that becomes the Imperial War Graves Commission.
And that's in 1917, isn't it?
Exactly. They have a report, what we're going to do, and they say everybody should be, whatever their military rank or position in civil life, everybody should have equal treatment in their graves. Now, that's quite controversial at the time, because a lot of richer families thought that they should have the right to bring their bring the dead back and bury them in the manorial, estate or something.
And that's a key decision, isn't it? That everyone will be buried where they died.
Yeah, where they died, same grave, same grave design.
Right. And so when this gets the green light, the Prince of Wales, the future Edward VIII, becomes the president of it. They get in basically kind of amazing people.
Yeah,
get involved in it. So they have Britain's absolute top architects.
Yeah, Lutyens, the great imperial architect.
Yeah, Lutyens and Herbert Baker, both of whom worked on New Delhi.
Yeah.
Reginald Blomfield, who redesigned Chequers.
Yeah.
Fabulous moustache. I mean, you can't have an imperial committee without a moustache.
There's many moustaches on this committee.
But also, we've already mentioned Kipling. But Kipling is the kind of literary advisor. He's the guy who comes up with the phrases.
We could argue, I think reasonably, that Kipling is the author of Remembrance, that he created the Remembrance, many of the Remembrance rituals that and the sort of, I guess the language of Remembrance, isn't it? Because it's Kipling who comes up with the idea. So they have this brilliant idea.
Soldier of the Great War, known unto God.
Known unto God. He does that. But also if you go to any major war graves cemetery, have you been to some of the World War One?
I have, yeah.
Cemeteries. They're very moving, aren't they? They're oddly moving.
Yeah. I'd never had any desire to go and see them at all. I always felt incredibly unsentimental about them. And then we went to Ypres, because that's where my grandfather didn't die there, but he got wounded and invalided out. So we went there, see the Menem Gate and everything. And they are kind of overwhelming. Yeah.
And you go there and they have this thing called, the Stone of Remembrance, which is this kind of classic kind of Lutyens construction, kind of abstract, almost slightly modernist stone. And on that, you have Kipling's line that he took from Ecclesiasticus, their names liveth forevermore.
Can I pick up on that?
Go on.
In a way that will annoy you.
Don't.
Okay, I'm going to. So in the main cemeteries, there are two kind of commanding images. So you have the Stone of Remembrance and you have a Cross of Sacrifice.
So Reginald Blomfield designed the Cross of Sacrifice with his moustache. Oh, I know where you're going with this. Oh, for goodness sake.
So the Stone of Remembrance is modelled on the lineaments of the Parthenon.
Yeah.
And I think that lurking behind a lot of this is ancient Greece.
Okay, I didn't think you were going there, so I'm delighted.
Can I elaborate on that?
Do, because they surprised me. I thought it was all going to be about Christianity.
We'll be coming to that, I can assure you.
Oh, no.
So a lot of... this is an age where the kind of people who are organising remembrance committees and all that kind of stuff are absolutely steeped in ancient Greece, Greek literature and so on. During the war, London buses have extracts from Pericles' funeral oration on the side. And this funeral oration is given by Pericles in the second year of the Peloponnesian War. And it's an annual ritual where somebody gives a talk to commemorate the dead. And preceding this, Thucydides says that what the Athenians do is that they gather up the bones of the bodies and the bones of those who've died in battle. They bring them back to Athens and they lay them in a kind of tent outside Athens. And they organize them up into the 10 tribes. Every Athenian citizen belongs to one of 10 tribes. And then after 3 days, they all get put into the 10 coffins and carried away and buried. But there is an 11th coffin. And this coffin, Thucydides says, is empty to commemorate those. They don't know who they are, who the bodies are.
Nice.
So there's a strong element there of kind of the idea that citizen soldiers who've died fighting for their country should be properly commemorated. There's a sense that you have to kind of incorporate those who are missing, those who are unknown, those whose identities have been lost. And it's it's kind of woven into the idea that the Parthenon itself and the Periclean rebuilding of the Acropolis after the Persians had burnt it in 480 BC, for a long while it was left empty as a kind of war memorial, and then Pericles redevelops it. But again, it's all the kind of the famous buildings that people will kind of, the Parthenon's the most famous. It's designed as a memorial to the dead of Marathon and to the great victory at Salamis. And I'm sure that must be a part of what is. If there are people listening who know more about this than me, I'd be very interested. But I think it must be kind of, at the very least, even if it's subconsciously playing on the mind.
But also the cenotaph, Tom. So the stone of remembrance that you get in the cemeteries is not dissimilar, and I'm not totally dissimilar in design from the cenotaph. And the cenotaph, the very word of it, what is it? Cenotaphion.
Yeah, so empty tomb.
An empty tomb. So, I mean, the fact that clearly is there in. Not even in the subconscious. It must be there consciously, an idea of looking back to the Greeks.
It is. And so you do have that kind of Greek element. But then, of course, you have the question of what do you do about Christianity?
Yeah. They have huge arguments about that cross, don't they? They're massive. Some people say we shouldn't have a cross at all, which is interesting because they wouldn't have said that 100 years earlier.
Exactly. But actually, Britain remains, overwhelmingly a Christian country. And the First World War had served to kind of massively revive Christianity as something that people felt, that channeled people's grief, that kind of gave an explanation for why people had died, where the dead had gone. And so the Christian element of remembrance is actually incredibly important as well. Yeah. And I think is focused on the figure of the unknown warrior.
Yes.
Which perhaps we should come to after a break, do you think?
Let's do the unknown warrior is kind of 1920. But so before we do that, we've got a little bit of time where we can talk about what happened in 1919.
Okay, yes.
So 1919, you might think that the first sort of big moment of remembrance happens a year on, but it actually doesn't. It happens about 6 months later, 6 or 7 months. So they have a huge parade in London. And I think, was it June, July? 1919. And what's interesting about that is it reminds you that actually it's not all doom and gloom and kind of grief. There's a lot of celebration as well. So although soldiers themselves, when the war ended, they said they marked it with silence. They didn't know what to think. They just felt empty. But actually in London and Paris and so on, there's great orgies of kind of celebration. And they have this big parade. That's when the Cenotaph first appears, when it's first built in wood. In London, they have this huge parade of kind of veterans and so on. And then they have a big blowout banquet in November 1919, King George V and the president of the French Republic. And they actually get a bit of criticism for that in the papers. They say, should we be having
market?
Is this the way to market?
Because what they very notably don't do, say in Paris, is stick up something like the Arc de Triomphe.
No, they don't.
So there's no triumphalist architecture anywhere.
No, that's quite interesting. And the other thing that they bring in as well, which I think chimes with the lack of triumphalism, is the 2-minute silence. So that is new. That has never been done before. Do you know where that comes from?
No.
It comes from South Africa, interestingly. So the guy who was the mayor of Cape Town had lost his son. And they used to fire at the noonday gun at Signal Hill at Cape Town at noon. Which I assume was a ritual left over from kind of passing ships or something. And they say, well, why don't we have a 2-minute silence? They start off with a 3-minute silence, actually. And the mayor himself says, it's too long. Everyone got bored and started shuffling around and fidgeting. So let's have a 2-minute silence. Reuters then reported it. People in Britain started to copy it. And George V publishes a sort of public declaration a few days before the 11th of November 1919, in which he says, there's this great innovation. We should all do it.
Yeah.
And everybody does do it. And everything stops on the 11th. And the 2 minutes is rigorously sort of respected. And then ever since, the idea of the 2-minute silence has become.
Well, it's interesting that this guy in South Africa lost a son, as Kipling lost a son. And you do get the sense that the rituals that emerge in the wake of the war are powered by a personal sense of grief from the people who are inspiring this. And it's the rituals that kind of chime with a broader sense of people wanting to mark it that work.
Don't you think it's there's an element maybe subconscious of guilt as well?
Absolutely.
A father who
that
sent
was the
his
case
son
with Kipling.
yeah, I think there's a huge element of that. And I think, yeah, it's also interesting that they're so sacred, aren't they? You were talking about this sort of, when I was thinking about Athens, the 2-minute silence is sacred. You interrupt it and people think, I mean, that's an incredibly profane thing to do, like desecrating the cenotaph, don't you think? I mean, those are the most sacred things in modern British culture to some extent.
Well, I think that is really interesting. And I think it's something that we could talk, because I think in a way, although it's kind of rooted a lot of it in Christian ritual, it has come to replace Christian ritual. And it does kind of provide I suppose, a vent for sentiments and feelings that in general, contemporary British society doesn't provide a vent for, which is why I think it's both so important and also kind of on the margin, so contested. So I think we should take a break here. And when we come back, we should look at the Fallen Warrior, which is an amazing story. And then look at how that kind of the legacy of that into the present day.
And poppies. We haven't talked about poppies. We'll definitely talk about poppies. All right. See you after the break.
This episode is brought to you by Rocket Money.
Tom, we often talk about how to organise our finances. I'm very conscious that I'm paying for a lot of mad subscriptions. And there's one thing that we've talked about often on this show. It's the thing that we probably hate more than any other, and it's a hidden fee. I would love to get my finances under control. There are all these things piling up on our bank statements, and I think I need to fix this problem. I need to sort this out and to stop this.
I mean, my finances are so chaotic that I need this app.
So I'll tell you what it is. It's called Rocket Money. It's a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending and it helps to lower your bills so that you can grow your savings.
With Rocket Money, you can track all of your subscriptions and you can easily cancel within the app with just a few taps, saving you time, avoiding charges. And you can also set budgets and goals and get personalized insights and regular reports to track how you're doing. They will even send you real-time alerts for large transactions, upcoming bills, refunds, and even low balances. So let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/ishistory.
That's rocketmoney.com/ishistory. rocketmoney.com/ishistory.
This episode is brought to you by the Financial Times. I think we both agree, Dominic, that in the clamour of countless voices competing to break the news and telling you the what, the who, and the where on these stories, there's often something missing, isn't there?
There is, Tom, because I think to get a true understanding of any story, you really need to know why. Take FT journalism. It goes deeper, providing the insight, analysis, and perspective to help you see the whole story and truly understand the issues that matter. Why did it happen? Why is it important? And why will it matter? I've got a brilliant example. So they had an article recently, a fascinating article about why populism became popular. And this Financial Times article absolutely delved into that. It was so interesting.
And does it nail it?
Yeah, it nailed it. Absolutely nailed it. And it really made me look at populism in a new light.
Well, if you're interested in the why, we have good news.
Yes, listeners to The Rest is History can save more than 40% on an annual digital subscription to the Financial Times by visiting ft.com/history. For the why, Financial Times.
So, Tom, this Sunday, the event of the season, 5 p.m, Leicester Square in London, the Odeon, The Rest is History live. There are only a few days left now. Are you excited? Are you nervous?
The glittering heart of London's West End.
Yeah.
And what a glittering occasion it will be. You and me looking at the relationship between history and cinema. Can't wait for it.
You haven't said if you're excited or you're nervous.
Of course. Well, I'm excited and nervous.
Yeah, we both are. I think
while simultaneously being full of confidence.
That's a lot. Because I know, in a very modest way, I like to think.
I know it's going to be a great show because we've talked it out and we've worked it all out. It's going to be fabulous. And there are very few tickets left.
Very
I'm not
few.
just saying that.
No, last time there were very few, but now there are really very few. Yeah,
even fewer. So hurry while stocks last, and you can find it by looking for Podicon on Ticketmaster. Podicon, or just search for Rest is History Live. And as Dominic said, I'm both excited, nervous, and full of confidence.
I'm all of those things too. See you then.
We'll see you there.
Welcome back to The Rest is History. We're talking about remembrance, and in particular, remembering the end of the First World War, which has become the template for all sort of rituals of remembrance. So, Tom, you said you wanted to talk about the Unknown Warrior, which I know you know a lot about. And it is, a great story. Why wouldn't you know a lot about it?
So I didn't really know anything about it until yesterday. And then I had an absolutely horrendous journey back from Salisbury, where, of course, there'd been this train accident. I had to get back to London. So there were a lot of rail replacement bus services. So I found a fantastic podcast, which I think went out last summer, called the Unknown Warrior. Little 20-minute ones. I highly recommend it if you are interested. So everything I'm going to say now derives from that. So apologies.
I can't believe you're advertising rival podcasts on our podcast.
Well, you know, I literally would know nothing about the subject unless I'd listened to every single episode they did. It's an amazing story.
Yeah.
And the idea for it seems to have originated perhaps with Thucydides. Perhaps I gather that something similar to this was done in your favourite war, the Schleswig-Holstein War.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, apparently. But the guy who's chiefly behind it is this remarkable man who I'd never heard of, but who, he's just, what a hero. The Reverend David Railton.
Yeah, he's a very impressive man.
A very impressive man. Vicar, signs up, becomes a kind of vicar in the army. Wins the MC, never talks about it. His son then got the MC in the Second World War, never talked about it. And his grandson suddenly discovered that his dad and his grandfather had both won the MC and never talked about it.
That's a lot of pressure on the grandson.
It's a kind of example of modesty that both of us, I think,
would
find hard to compute. And he had, so obviously had a very heroic war record. He was involved in clearing a wood of corpses. So he'd kind of had to go in and pick up bits of flesh and body.
Yeah.
And, just horrible. And the story that he told later in his life was that he'd seen a rough white cross with the words "to an unknown British soldier" on it. That's
right. So Armentières, that's the place.
Yeah. Apparently this may be a slightly false memory.
That's a bit disappointing.
Well,
you build him up and then you tear him down.
No, I'm not saying that he lied. I'm saying
British media.
No, I think that, the memory plays tricks and you can, whatever. I mean, we don't know, but there was an earlier account in which he didn't mention this. But anyway, so he dwells on this idea that there should be, a body of an unknown soldier should be brought back to London and should be placed in Westminster Abbey. And he sits on this and dwells on this. And I hadn't realised that it's only in the summer of 1920 that he writes to the Dean of Westminster with this proposal. Dean of Westminster goes, "That's a brilliant idea." Lloyd George goes, "That's a brilliant idea." George V goes, "Not sure about that."
Yeah, that's extraordinary, isn't it? That George V is so sceptical about it. I think it's just because he's so unimaginative.
Yes.
And he's only interested in stamp collecting and creasing his trousers on the wrong side. And so he doesn't have any, he can't conceive of how this would be a very romantic and moving gesture.
And so essentially it all has to be organised within a few weeks.
But they do it. It's an amazing story.
And they organise it amazingly.
Yeah.
And this is where basically the whole superstructure of remembrance comes to be worked out within a few weeks.
So they get 4 bodies, don't they? One from Ypres, one from Arras, one from the Battle of the Aisne, and one from the Somme. And they cover them. They're all in sort of quite plain coffins, and they're covered with the Union Jack. Yeah. And then they get a brigadier general to come in, and he closes his eyes and puts his hand on one of the coffins.
Brigadier General Wyatt.
Yeah.
Who's in command of British troops in France and Flanders.
Right. And he puts his hand on one of them, and then the others are taken away.
Get taken away.
Yeah. And then it's like a game show. Then the winner proceeds to the next round where he's put into a new coffin.
Well, no, the winner's won.
Yeah.
There is no further round.
That's all right.
He's hit the bullseye.
Fair enough. He's put in a new coffin made of the, I didn't think we'd be
the coffin! The coffin is made of wood from Hampton Court.
Hampton Court Palace of oak. Yeah, British
Hampton
oak.
Court Palace. And a sword, a Crusader's sword from the
sword.
Tower of London.
I know, very good.
Put on the top, and
very
he's
good.
buried in the earth of France. And we're slight kind of background of Anglo-French hostility at the moment over fish. But this story is a reminder of how close and intimate the bonds between France and Britain were. That this unknown warrior, British soldier, is buried in French soil, gets escorted by a French escort to Boulogne. Marshal Foch, who's was in command of the Allied forces in 1918, salutes it, and it gets taken onto HMS Verdun.
But there's all
been named after the Great Battle.
The whole children of the town are there. They're all
everybody. Yeah,
everybody. The entire town is there to see it. I mean, an incredibly moving moment. As you say, HMS Verdun. I mean, it couldn't be more aptly named.
Yeah,
the battle that is the Somme to the French. Their equivalent of this huge sacrifice. And then it ends up even the when it gets to London, the interment in Westminster Abbey is incredibly moving.
Well, the whole thing. I mean, I think the only thing that you compare it to is Diana's funeral. But
oh my God!
But the crowd. Well, no, but in terms of kind of unexpected impact of a funeral.
Yeah.
So there are, people who lived through it will remember the vast numbers of crowds that came out for Diana's funeral, but the crowds for this were much, much larger. And they were gathering at Dover as HMS Verdun landed. It lined the rail route from Dover to Victoria. At Victoria, there's a guard comes and stands vigil over it overnight. And apparently every year, still to this day, between platform 8 and 9, a vigil is held.
Is that right?
Apparently so, yes.
That's a lovely detail. I didn't know that.
And then it gets taken in cortege through down the Mall, down Whitehall, past the Cenotaph. And this is when Lutyens' Cenotaph is unveiled.
Yeah.
And it gets taken into Westminster Abbey. And the whole thing has been organised by Lord Curzon.
A very superior
person. But who in this case is plays a blinder, because he's the Foreign Secretary, he's former Viceroy of India, he's kind of tremendously stiff person, but has absolutely brilliant idea for ritual and all that kind of stuff. And he makes sure that it's escorted in past an escort of everyone who's won the VC. And he's made sure that it's not just kind of the great and the good. It's not just kind of people from high society who are at Westminster Abbey. But he specifies that it should be women who've lost their husbands and their sons.
Yeah. I think that's such a lovely, incredibly moving detail, isn't it?
Very, very moving.
And then it's visited, isn't it? After the ceremony, it is visited by millions of people go to pay their respects.
Yeah.
And you can sort of understand it, actually, because it's the perfect symbol for a kind of democratic war.
Because it could be anyone.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
So that's 1920.
But also, Dominic, on the topic of royalty and the unknown warrior, I gather that when Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon married the future George VI, she laid her bouquet on the tomb of the unknown warrior.
Yes, she did.
To commemorate her brother who died at the Battle of Loos. But
also, isn't that that's a very clever, a brilliantly loaded PR gesture, because that's, she and her husband were going to be all about self-sacrifice and duty and responsibility, in contrast to his older brother, who's just a narcissistic shit.
Yes. Yes. Even though he's the president of the Imperial War Graves Commission.
Yes.
But apparently this is now what royal brides always do if they get married.
Yeah, they do. Didn't Kate Middleton do this on her wedding day?
I think so. Yes, I think so.
So that's 1920 that happens. And then 1921 is when you have the creation of the British Legion. And this is Douglas Haig, who most people, if they haven't been persuaded by Gary Sheffield's last appearance on the podcast, they will think of Douglas Haig as the butcher of the Somme and all this kind of thing. But Douglas Haig actually is incredibly, he's beloved of a lot of servicemen because of all his efforts after the war to kind of raise money for injured servicemen and so on in the British Legion.
And I think he was a pallbearer for the Unknown Warrior.
Yes, I think he was. Exactly. So I think there are 6 million men who've served in the war, and this is a time of enormous unemployment in the early 1920s. So they haven't come back to a kind of homes fit for heroes as they were promised.
And David Railton, the guy who comes up with the idea for the Unknown Warrior, I mean, he goes back and he commits himself to looking to caring for the absolute poorest among the veterans who've come back who've absolutely lost everything.
So you built them up, you've torn them down, and then you built them back up again, Tom.
Well, that's what this podcast is all about.
Yeah.
So it's an emotional roller coaster.
So the British Legion is what gives rise to obviously the best known symbol of remembrance, which lots of people will be wearing, maybe even as they listen to this podcast, which is the poppy, which Tom Holland says he doesn't wear. So I'm not trying to get you cancelled, Tom, honestly.
No,
but I can see the Daily Mail feature now.
And who would write that?
I can't imagine. They'd probably have to write it under. If it's written by a another, you'll know who it is. Anon. An anonymous top historian speaks out. Anyway, right. So the poppy. So
You're
the poppy.
about poppies.
No, I'm not.
You also are cruising towards me.
No, I'm absolutely not. So the poppy comes from a poem, a lovely poem by a guy called John McCrae, another very admirable chap. So he was a doctor. He's a Canadian. He's a lieutenant colonel. He loses a very close friend at the Second Battle of Ypres in the spring of 1915, which is the first battle at which the Germans used gas. And he writes this famous poem that basically, I think pretty much everybody in Britain now does in schools, in Flanders Fields. In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, etc., etc. And this poem inspires, it's a really interesting story because it inspires two people kind of simultaneously. So one of them is an American academic who's a professor at the University of Georgia. This is a bit of a Halloween story, actually, about importing a American tradition. And she was called Moyna Michael, and she worked with disabled American servicemen in, I think, New York. And she basically comes up with the idea of the poppy. She thinks, she decides to go, she goes to get herself a poppy and she says, I'll wear it every day to remember those who have fallen. And she comes up with this idea about, you could sell them and raise money for veterans. And at the same time, by a complete coincidence, there's a French woman called Anna Guérin who had been born in France. She was in Britain when the war broke out, but then she moved to the United States and was fundraising for disabled servicemen. And she comes up with the idea at the same time. And she comes back to Britain. And she goes and has a meeting with the British Legion. And she says, I've got this great idea for a poppy. The red Flanders Fields, the poppies that grew there. Everybody knows about it. And she says, I will pay to manufacture 1 million poppies in France. And Earl Haig says, that's a great idea. And the Legion say, well, we'll make another 8 million here in Britain. So they sell 9 million in the first year. Tells you what a massive hit it was. And they're originally just made of kind of fabric. They're very simple. But they say on them, on one side it says British Legion Remembrance Day, and on the other it says, made by the women and children in the devastated areas of France. So there's your Anglo-French amity again, Tom. Yeah. And it raises shed loads of money, tons of money, and becomes this huge phenomenon that people they buy the poppies and they wear them every year. So they build a factory in Aylesford. I don't actually know where Aylesford is, but I'm just reading that out. And they build another factory. Haig's wife opens a factory in Scotland, which I think still makes poppies in Scotland to this day. So, it's a nice story. But then, of course, you have the white poppy, which this is where the controversy kind of comes in. Because even then in the 1920s and early 1930s, some people say, I don't want to wear the poppy because I think it glorifies war. And so sort of people who are in...
Is that Vera Britain?
Yeah, it's the Cooperative Women's Guild. So it's, early 30s, left-leaning, kind of well-meaning, kind of what the playwright Michael Frayn calls the kind of herbivorous tendency in Britain, kind of what we would now think of as slightly sort of Guardian reading-ish. So and it's linked right at this point to pacifism. So the 1930s is this huge upsurge in pacifism, the Peace Pledge Union, and it's all about
never again.
This is never again. So this is different from the 20s, because I don't think people were really all about never again so much in the 20s. In the 20s, it was slightly more a muted hurrah, we won. It was very sad, but we won and we're very pleased. But in the 1930s, that has morphed into a kind of never again.
War is hell.
War is hell. And I think partly, obviously, because the spectre of war is now approaching. So people are more sort of jittery about war.
Yes. And I think that what's interesting about all the Tomb of the Undead Warrior, the poppies, the graves and everything, and the Remembrance, is that it constructs a kind of, saying earlier, a kind of post-Christian way of marking. Well, really, you remember our podcast with Ronald Hutton, and he's talking about how this time of year has always been commemorated as a time to, you're leaving the summer, you're going into the winter, that this gets Christianized as a celebration to commemorate the dead. The Reformation gets rid of that. in the 20th century, the kind of process of de-Christianization, people forget Christian rituals. And yet what you see is, I guess because of the coincidence of the fact that Remembrance Day is happening when it does, that actually with Halloween, with Guy Fawkes, with Remembrance Day, you have this kind of effectively, 12-day festival of the dead. And Remembrance Day is the most important of those, I think, in terms of...
Well, it's the only one that's sacred, isn't it?
Yeah, it's because it properly channels ideas of the sacred. But I think that the fact that it's kind of complemented by Halloween, people are nervous of the sacred and people are afraid of where the sacred might lead. And I guess that the kind of nervousness about Remembrance Days in the 30s is a kind of expression of a reticence about Remembrance Day that endures into the present.
Yeah, although there's an argument, isn't there, that Remembrance Day has become, it's not just the sacred, it's become sentimentalized now in a way that it wasn't maybe in the 1920s and 30s.
And it's been sentimentalized. Well, so we ought to talk about the Second World War as well, because that, of course, so the Second World War then adds fuel to the requirement for remembrance.
And changes the date, interestingly. So they no longer want to have it on the 11th because it will interrupt war production if that's a weekday. So they say, we'll do it only on Sundays. And then after the war, they move permanently. I think the Archbishop of Westminster actually suggests to the Attlee government that they're thinking, what should we do for both world wars? And he says, why don't we have it on Sunday? So that's why you have this slightly confusing thing in Britain, which I have to admit, until I looked into this, I always found a bit bewildering, that you basically have two Remembrance Days, one on the 11th, when sometimes you have the 2-minute silence and things stop, particularly when you had the centenary of the First World War.
And then you have the church services.
And then you have the church services on the Sunday. But it's the Sunday that's the kind of designated day now, isn't it? And that's for both world wars.
But you see, again, I think that reflects the way in which the ritual has kind of emerged from Christian ceremony. Yeah. And it's kind of contested. There's always, so that kind of, is it a Greek, is it a Christian way of commemorating the dead? It's always been there.
Yeah. But also it's become... So we had a lot of questions. For example, Josh Glancy, who writes for the Sunday Times, says, is there a time when it'll cease to be dominated by the First World War? And lots of people have asked about the world wars and remembrance. Already, the world wars, there has been this sense of the world wars ceding some of their control of Remembrance Day, hasn't there? I mean, when you read official kind of British Legion websites and things now, they mention the world wars, but not as much as they would have done 50 years ago. And now it's kind of the victims of war generally. I think it's sort of slightly more amorphous.
Well, in a way, I think its prominence has risen over the past few decades. I mean, I don't particularly remember it as a big thing when I was young. I think it was the Second World War commemorations, wasn't it?
In the 1990s.
In the 1990s. Yeah. And then I think because Britain's been involved in a number of, Afghanistan and Iraq, it's become a way of keeping the military in the public eye.
I think there's definitely an element of that.
Injured veterans.
And there's also a very mundane explanation, which is that the world wars feature quite heavily on the national curriculum. So a lot of primary schools will do elements of the two world wars, and Remembrance Day becomes a really important kind of teaching tool for them.
Yeah, and then we've had the 100th anniversary. So
and the 100th anniversary. So there's I agree. I think there are deep cultural reasons. Certainly the Second World War has become part of our national mythology, but also there are almost quite mundane kind of institutional reasons why it's become.
Well, and this question from Mark Woodhouse, is Remembrance Day the most religious day of the year? I think another aspect of it is that Britain has become a multicultural society. And so purely Christian days of celebration no longer unite the nation in quite the way they did, even Christmas. Whereas Remembrance Day, people from across the Commonwealth fought.
They do. And of course, there's so much emphasis now on, Sikh soldiers in World War I or something, that you can do it in, to use the jargon, an inclusive way.
And I think it's, and it's telling that the iconography of the First World War cemeteries are multi-faith. The stones are designed that you can have a cross on if you're Christian, but say Jewish. And that was amazing that that when the Nazis occupied Belgium,
they didn't smash them all up.
Left them alone.
No, that is interesting, isn't it?
And apparently, when Ypres got retaken, the last post was played at the Menin Gate, even as fighting was going on.
Is that right? Because, of course, they play the last post at the Menin Gate every day, don't they?
Except during the war.
Right. Fascinating.
And then the moment they got back in, they started
to do it straight away.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple of questions actually about Remembrance Day, which I think are really. So Barry Grogan has a question about the poppy, and he says, has it turned into more of a cultural symbol as opposed to a symbol of remembrance? And I think he's onto something, because the poppy, your choice of whether or not to wear a poppy and what colour poppy you wear, it's now become a very kind of politicized. Yeah, it is a culture. It is a bit of a cultural.
It's not a cultural. I don't think it is quite. I think I don't think it's kind of
a signifier. It is a signifier of sorts.
But you see, I think not even as much as, say, face masks.
Not even as much as face. A white poppy is a signifier, though. You can't deny that.
Yeah, a white poppy, definitely.
You see a white poppy wearer and you think he probably doesn't read the Daily Express.
I think one of the things I think also that's happened is that there has become a kind of nervousness about specifically national commemorations. So having kind of bigged up the idea of Remembrance Day as a national celebration.
But they do have, in France and Belgium, it's called Armistice Day. In the United States, it's called Veterans Day. So we're not, one of the things that it probably is unique about us is that we like to think we're unique, and we can be very sort of parochial in our self-flagellation. But other people have Remembrance Day ceremonies. there's nothing unusual about it.
Yes. But I think that there has become, at certain levels, a nervousness about any sense that there should be something specific about national mourning.
Yeah, you should just mourn.
You should mourn everybody who dies.
Yeah, well, this is what football clubs now do, interestingly. They now say the victims of all wars in their Remembrance Day. And you sort of think, what, all wars? The 100 Years' War?
Yeah.
The First Balkan War? Come on.
Yeah.
Now, Michael Wood has a really good question. As you would expect from Michael Wood, friend of the show, great historian in his own right. He says, when and how will we deliberately forget these wars so we can move on? And actually, that's a really good question. So, in the 24th century, will people still be remembering the First World War? You'd have to say no. Well,
he says, I'm not sure it's Michael Wood, the historian. I think it may be another Michael Wood.
Maybe I'm
also a friend of the show.
We have two Michael Wood friends of the show, don't we? It's true. It hadn't occurred to me.
He puts in brackets, as we did after the Napoleonic Wars, etc. But the difference is that, as we said at the beginning of the show, we didn't commemorate the Napoleonic Wars in this way.
Yeah.
This is new. This is, for the 20th century, this is something that had not been done before.
But when would you stop talking about the World Wars, Tom? Or do you think never?
Well, I don't know, because we don't have any guidance. We've invented a ritual.
When did the Greeks stop talking about the Persian Wars? They never stopped talking about it.
No, they never always going on about it. But that's slightly different, isn't it? It's the rituals. So the rituals of a commemoration in which Pericles gave his speech ended when Athens ceased to be an independent democracy.
Right.
Because it's bound up with civic identity. And the thing about the remembrance is that it's an invented ritual that, in a way, provides scope for people to contemplate death and bereavement and suffering in a way that, in general, our public cultural life does not provide opportunities for. We've become squeamish about it in a way that previous generations didn't. And I think that the decline of institutional religion has left a kind of gap in the market that the Remembrance Day celebrations fills.
I'm sure that's true. I also think there's another dimension, which is that it has become a celebration of the idea of sacrifice and duty and so on. Do you not think? So there's this slight idea of
but
they gave their lives for their country. They, especially for people who think about it in terms of particularly the First and Second World Wars, that it's about people who put the collective, the greater good above individual.
I'm not sure about that.
I do. Think so. I think it's absolutely about that.
Because you think of the Blackadder stuff, you think about the.
But people aren't thinking about that when Remembrance Day, are they?
I think the idea of stiff upper lips, of service, of duty, of responsibility, of signing up to do your bit for king and country. I think lots and lots of people hold that very dear, but I think lots and lots of people see it as faintly risible.
Risible?
Yeah.
Tom Holland.
It's been the stuff.
You spent too much time promoting that Guardian Saturday section.
And you've spent too long in Middle England. I do think, ever since the 60s, the idea of duty and responsibility have been the subject of satire and mockery.
I'm noting all this down, by the way, for that article about your refusal to wear
by
the poppy.
top anon historian.
Yeah.
I don't refuse to wear the poppy. I just never have.
Photographed on the streets of Brixton today, the 11th of November. Tom Holland goes to buy milk while defiantly refusing.
No, I'll be reading The Gardener.
Oh yeah, very good. Of course you will. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I think we've talked ourselves to the brink of cancellation, haven't we? Of cancelling each other.
We're going to be cancelled by rival constituencies.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that's as it should be. So yes, I think Remembrance Day, I agree with you. I think it is I think it does have a sacred meaning. You see that in people's reaction when the Cenotaph is attacked. Far more than, we've talked about the statue of Churchill, but far more than the statue of Churchill, the Cenotaph feels like the one sacred space on this island, actually, in a weird way, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's
apart from the Stonehenge Tunnel.
Apart from that, yes. No, I think you're right. I think that I don't want to say it, but I mean, I'm not going to say it.
I was going
to say.
You've got to say it now.
Well, I was going to say that of all the symbols of Britain,
yeah,
that is the one that I think its destruction would most wound. And I'm kind of hesitant to say it in case this then inspires some terrorist group or something to blow it up. But I think it has a kind of emotional resonance that because it's for everyone, and because it is empty, and because it's not about great men, it's about the entirety of the nation. But it's not even ultimately about the nation. It's about the fact that death and suffering happens.
Yeah.
It does have a kind of sacred quality, I think.
Yeah,
I think
I agree with you completely, Tom. I think it's a place of grief and of contemplation and all these kinds of things, and that does give it a status well beyond anything else.
When we did our walk looking at the statues, you said that was the one place that people were standing by it, that there were wreaths there, and so it still has its power.
It absolutely does.
A century on,
right? We're off to go and write our rival articles. But actually, we're really off to go. You have actually inspired me, Tom. I am going to go and reread The Gardener, and I think everybody else should. It's a brilliant short story. We started with it, we'll end with it.
And you have to read it right to the end, because it's not until the end that you get the full punch.
All right. We will see you next time. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to The Rest is History. For bonus episodes, early access, ad-free listening, and access to our chat community, please sign up at restishistorypod.com. That's restishistorypod.com.